You think you can fix this? Kyle scoffed, his voice dripping with disdain. The sound of his boots echoed through the engine room, a sterile, high-tech space full of blinking lights and buzzing computers. The hum of the aircraft carrier was all-encompassing, but it did nothing to stop the rising tension in the air. Engineers swarmed the massive engine, laptops open, fingers flying over keys, but nothing was working. The engine, despite all their efforts, refused to come back to life. Sweat trickled down their brows, frustration mounting with every failed attempt. The future of the entire fleet rested on this, and no one could get it started. Kyle shot a glance at his team, his smirk growing. Well, we've tried everything. Guess it's just another piece of junk. He paused, eyes landing on the man standing silently at the back of the room, a worn-out figure in civilian clothes. What's he gonna do? He laughed, turning back to the dead engine. What's an old man gonna fix, huh? The room fell silent for a moment, as if the entire ship was holding its breath. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, the man stepped forward, the wrinkles in his face deepening as he surveyed the engine. His name was Jack Ace Hamilton, a Navy veteran, once a legend aboard ships like this, now reduced to an observer, a relic of a past few could understand. No one in the room knew who he was, but they'd soon find out. Jack's weathered hands, though calloused and aged, moved with the practiced precision of someone who had once repaired equipment in the most desperate of circumstances. The younger engineers stood frozen, unsure whether to mock or step aside. Jack ignored them. He moved closer to the engine, his eyes scanning the intricate parts. He didn't need the diagnostic tools that the young techs relied on. He could read machines the way a seasoned soldier read the battlefield. This is a classic problem, Jack muttered under his breath, pulling a small, rusted tool from his belt. His voice was soft, but there was an undeniable authority to it, the kind that comes only from decades of hard-earned knowledge. He crouched by the engine, the same engine that had confounded the team for hours. As his hands moved over the machine, the hum of the ship seemed to fade into the background. The room, filled with the most advanced technology available, suddenly felt eerily quiet. What's he doing? Kyle asked, his tone shifting from amusement to curiosity. Jack didn't answer. He just worked, his hands steady and sure, as though the machine were part of him. The young engineers watched, bewildered, as Jack fixed the issue with a couple of well-placed turns of his wrench. The engine sputtered to life. A hum, then another. Before they knew it, the engine roared to life, the sound of it reverberating through the ship. It was a simple fix. A veteran's fix. A fix only someone like Jack could make. Kyle's smug smile evaporated, replaced by a stunned silence. The engineers exchanged looks, none of them able to fully comprehend what they had just witnessed. Jack stood up, wiping his hands on a rag. The ship's ready, he said, his voice low but final. He turned to leave, but not before the door to the engine room swung open, revealing Admiral Tom Cooper, a towering figure of authority. He stepped inside, his eyes narrowing as he saw the engine running. Without a word, he walked up to Jack and extended a hand. The engineers watched, their mouths hanging open, as the Admiral acknowledged Jack's quiet, unspoken expertise. Good work, Hamilton, he said, his voice full of respect. Kyle stood frozen, unable to move. The Admiral didn't even glance at him, his focus entirely on the old veteran who had just saved the day. The room was still, all eyes on Jack, the man who had once been a legend, now proven beyond doubt. Kyle's cocky attitude vanished. The power had shifted. Jack had earned not just the respect of the Admiral, but the silent admiration of the entire crew. As Jack left the room, he did so with the same quiet dignity he had entered with. The engineers had learned something that day. Sometimes, wisdom and experience are worth far more than the latest technology. And some things can never be replaced. The sound of the engine roaring to life echoed through the room, but the tension was far from over. Kyle stood there, his eyes wide, his mouth half open, as he watched the engine whir to life, something he thought impossible just moments ago. He glanced at his team, none of them sure what to say, what to feel. Jack Ace Hamilton had just done what none of them could do in hours. The Admiral, still standing at the door, looked at Jack with a kind of respect that none of the engineers had ever seen from him before. Admiral Cooper nodded at Jack before turning to the engineers, who were still processing what had just happened. This is why we bring the best, the Admiral said, his voice unwavering, his eyes locked on the veteran. Now, get back to work. The fleet doesn't wait. Kyle shifted uncomfortably. He had spent his entire career priding himself on cutting-edge technology, software, and all the things that made him feel superior. But now, he realized how little he truly understood. He had just witnessed a legend fix what the most advanced tech couldn't. Sir, Jack's voice interrupted his thoughts, steady and calm. The engine's fine. Just keep the systems checked. There's an issue with the fuel lines that could cause a hiccup later. With those words, Jack turned and walked out of the room. The Admiral followed suit, leaving the engineers to process the reality of what had just happened. Kyle was left standing there, a wave of humility washing over him. He had no words. As the door closed behind Jack, the buzz of activity returned to the room. But the energy was different now. It wasn't the usual frantic energy of young engineers trying to prove themselves. There was a kind of quiet respect that hadn't been there before. Kyle wiped his forehead, a mixture of sweat and realization. He fixed it in minutes. One of the engineers whispered, still staring at the engine. And we couldn't do it all day. Kyle nodded, but his mind was still racing. Jack Hamilton, the old man who had been a quiet presence in the corner, had just proven something far more valuable than any piece of equipment or any test. It wasn't just about knowledge or being quick to fix problems. It was about wisdom, experience, and the kind of quiet confidence that didn't need to shout. Jack had been through wars, through experiences that no machine could ever teach. And in that moment, the young engineers learned that no amount of technology or theory could ever replace the wisdom of someone who had been there, done that. You think he's really retired? Kyle muttered under his breath. His question was met with silence. No one had an answer. The ship was ready. But so were they, ready to take a lesson from the past and understand that the greatest assets didn't always come in the form of the latest tech or gadgets. They came in the form of people like Jack Hamilton, who didn't need a fancy label to be the best. The next morning, the ship was abuzz with the usual hum of activity, but today something felt different. The engineers worked with a new sense of purpose, their movements faster, sharper, as though they were trying to prove something. To themselves, to the others, and perhaps to the old man who had shown them what true expertise looked like. Kyle couldn't shake the image of Jack, Ace, Hamilton walking out of the engine room. He had been ready for mockery, for a condescending, I told you so moment, but there was nothing. Jack had simply done what he had come to do and left without fanfare. Kyle stood at his station, looking over the diagnostic readings, but his mind wandered back to Jack. What was it that made him so sure? Kyle was no stranger to solving problems, to working under pressure, but Jack's quiet authority was something else. It was as if the decades of experience had embedded themselves so deeply in him that he didn't even need to think twice. It was just instinct, precision honed by years of doing what needed to be done, not for recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. The sound of boots echoed down the hallway, and Kyle turned to see Admiral Cooper walking towards him. The Admiral was a man of few words, his presence commanding respect without needing to say much. He stopped in front of Kyle, his sharp eyes scanning the young engineer. I hope you've learned something, the Admiral said, his tone direct but not unkind. Kyle nodded, unsure of what to say. The truth was, he had learned a lot more than just how to fix a broken engine. Good. The Admiral continued, a slight nod of approval. We all rely on the systems, on the tech. But there are times when it's the people who make the difference. Hamilton knows that better than anyone. He's seen it all, from the front lines to the engineering decks. You'd do well to remember that. The Admiral turned and began, walking away, but not before adding one final remark over his shoulder. I expect you to be better today. The fleet doesn't wait. Kyle stood there, the weight of the Admiral's words sinking in. He looked over at the team, still working, still focused. The respect they had shown Jack was more than just for his skills. It was for his experience, his resilience. Kyle took a deep breath and returned to his work. It wasn't just about fixing machines. It was about fixing the mindset, the approach to the job, to life. As the day went on, the tension in the air started to fade. The engineers were more efficient, more collaborative. They worked together, sharing ideas, drawing from each other's knowledge. But Kyle knew that something had changed. It wasn't the engine they had fixed, it was their approach to it. They now understood that sometimes, The solution isn't in the technology, it's in the person handling it. Jack Hamilton had reminded them of that, without ever saying a word about it. As the day drew to a close, Kyle found himself looking forward to the next challenge. He knew that the path ahead wouldn't always be easy, but now, he felt ready for it. Because, just like Jack, he knew that sometimes the answer was simpler than they made it out to be. It was about understanding the problem from the inside, from a place of experience and expertise that couldn't be replaced by technology alone. The next few days brought a new rhythm to the ship. The engineers worked more cohesively, their usual sharp disagreements replaced by a sense of unity and purpose. Kyle noticed the difference in himself as well. Every task now felt different, as if the lessons of the past had woven themselves into his approach. He no longer saw problems as insurmountable walls, but as challenges to be solved, with experience as his guide. Jack Hamilton's quiet mastery had left an impression far deeper than the simple repair of an engine. The workday began earlier now, with everyone arriving on time and eager to get started. Kyle had spent his nights reading up on the things Jack had mentioned during his brief visit to the engine room. Small things like fuel line issues and pressure regulation that he had never fully understood before. The young engineers, once quick to dismiss anything that didn't come from their digital displays, were now paying closer attention to the physical mechanics of the machines, and it showed. One afternoon, as the ship was in the middle of a routine inspection, Kyle was called into the control room. The Admiral was there, along with a few higher-ranking officers. Kyle could feel the weight of their eyes on him as he approached. "Kyle," Admiral Cooper began, his voice calm but filled with the kind of authority that made you listen. "I need you to oversee the recalibration of the reactor system. Make sure it's running efficiently." Kyle nodded, his heart racing a little faster. This wasn't just any task. This was one of the most critical systems aboard the ship. If something went wrong, it could delay the mission, compromise the safety of everyone on board. But Kyle didn't feel the panic he might have felt a few weeks ago. Instead, he felt prepared. "Understood, sir," he replied. As he turned to head out, Admiral Cooper's voice stopped him. "By the way, you're doing well. Keep it up." The words hung in the air long after Kyle had left the room. He wasn't used to hearing praise from someone like the Admiral, a man whose approval meant more than he had ever realized. It was a validation, not just of his work, but of the growth he had gone through since Jack had stepped into the engine room. He wasn't just fixing problems now. He was solving them, anticipating them, with a calm and confidence that he had once thought he lacked. The next few hours were a blur of calculations, checks, and precise adjustments. Kyle worked with his team, double-checking every reading, every result, making sure nothing was overlooked. As the final adjustments were made and the system hummed to life with perfect efficiency, Kyle stood back for a moment. He felt a deep satisfaction in the work. He had done it. He had done it the right way. Later that evening, as the ship sailed smoothly through the waters, Kyle found himself thinking about Jack. The old man had done more than fix an engine. He had redefined what it meant to be a true professional, not just in skill, but in attitude. The ability to remain calm in the face of any challenge. The understanding that it wasn't always about the latest technology, but about the experience, the intuition that came from years of hard-earned lessons. As Kyle sat in the mess hall, a rare smile crossed his face. He wasn't the same man who had been so eager to prove himself before. He wasn't just a cog in the machine. He was part of something bigger, something far more important. And for the first time, he was proud of it. The days following the reactor calibration were a blur of success after success. Kyle was in a rhythm now, one that he hadn't experienced before. The Admiral's quiet approval had done more than boost his confidence. It had given him a renewed sense of purpose. Every task, every small victory, felt like a step towards something greater. The ship had become a second home to him, a place where he no longer felt like an outsider trying to prove himself. Instead, he had become an integral part of the team. There was a new respect among the engineers, and it wasn't just for the technology they worked with, but for the people who made it all work. Kyle's thoughts often returned to Jack Hamilton. The old man's quiet confidence had set something in motion inside him, something he wasn't entirely sure how to describe. Jack hadn't just fixed an engine. He had redefined the idea of what it meant to be a true professional. It wasn't the loudest voice or the fastest hands that got things done, but the calm, steady presence that came from years of experience. Jack was a reminder that, No matter how advanced technology became, it would never replace the wisdom of those who had lived through it all. Kyle had seen it firsthand. The ability to stay calm under pressure, to recognize the simple solution when everyone else was overcomplicating things. That was a kind of mastery that couldn't be taught in a classroom. It had to be lived. One morning, the Admiral called him to his office again. Kyle's heart skipped a beat as he walked through the door. This time, there was no task or project waiting for him. Instead, the Admiral sat behind his desk, his expression unreadable. "Kyle," the Admiral said, his voice steady. "I've been watching you these past few weeks. You've shown growth, not just in your technical skills, but in your leadership. The ship is relying on you now, and it's time you take the next step." Kyle's mind raced, trying to process what the Admiral was saying. "Sir?" he asked, unsure if he had heard him correctly. The Admiral stood up, walking over to a map of the fleet pinned on the wall. "I'm putting you in charge of the next major operation. You'll be overseeing the system's diagnostics, coordinating with the other ships in the fleet. You'll need to use everything you've learned, not just from the tech manuals, but from people like Jack." Kyle stood frozen for a moment, trying to absorb the weight of the responsibility being placed on him. "You've got what it takes," the Admiral continued. "Just don't forget the most important lesson. It's never just about the technology. It's about the people who use it." Kyle felt a wave of gratitude and fear wash over him. He had been given an opportunity, one that could change the course of his career. But he knew he wasn't the same person who had walked onto this ship all those weeks ago. He was ready for this. He had learned from the best. As the Admiral gave him the details of the operation, Kyle's thoughts briefly flickered to Jack and the quiet wisdom he had shared. Kyle had once thought it was all about proving himself. Now, he knew it was about something much bigger. It was about making sure the ship, the crew, and everything they worked for ran smoothly, not just because of the technology, but because of the people who knew how to use it. People like Jack. People who had earned their place with decades of experience and quiet integrity. As he left the Admiral's office, Kyle felt a sense of clarity he hadn't known before. The path ahead wasn't going to be easy, but he wasn't alone in it. And, more importantly, he knew exactly what it took to succeed. It was about wisdom. It was about experience. It was about being calm when everyone else was rushing. And with that, Kyle was ready. The days that followed were a whirlwind of responsibility for Kyle. He had taken on the task of overseeing the system's diagnostics for the fleet, and it was as daunting as it was rewarding. With every new challenge, Kyle felt the weight of the Admiral's words pressing on him. It wasn't just about the technology. It was about the people behind it. The operation had started smoothly. The systems were running efficiently, but there were moments of uncertainty, moments when things didn't go as planned. And it was in those moments that Kyle remembered Jack. He remembered how Jack had fixed the engine with quiet confidence, without hesitation, without a single word of arrogance. It was a reminder that leadership wasn't about barking orders. It was about knowing when to step in, when to let others do their jobs, and when to offer guidance. The first hiccup came 3 days into the operation. One of the auxiliary power systems on the fleet's support ship malfunctioned, causing a ripple effect that threatened to delay their progress. Kyle felt the familiar surge of anxiety. It was a complex issue, one that could take hours to sort out. But instead of panicking, Kyle took a deep breath. He called his team together, assessed the situation, and immediately started working on a solution. The engineers worked around the clock, but Kyle never let the pressure get to him. He stayed calm, ensuring that everyone on his team had the support they needed. The system was repaired in record time, and the operation continued on schedule. As the days passed, Kyle's confidence grew. He had found his rhythm as a leader, and he understood the importance of maintaining composure even when the stakes were high. He remembered Jack's words without words, the lessons he had learned from the old man's quiet actions. Jack had never said much, but his presence spoke volumes. His knowledge, his expertise, were evident in the way he carried himself. It was a reminder that experience wasn't something to be rushed. It had to be earned, step by step. One evening, as the ship sailed smoothly through the waters, Kyle found himself standing on the deck, watching the sunset. The operation was nearing its end, and everything had gone well. The systems were working, the team was functioning like a well-oiled machine, and the Admiral had praised him more than once. Kyle felt a deep sense of pride, not just in his accomplishments, but in the way the team had come together. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about everyone who had contributed, who had put in the hard work. As he stood there, the wind in his face, Kyle thought about the future. There was still so much to learn, so much to do. But for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid of what lay ahead. He knew that, no matter what challenges came his way, he would face them with the same calm confidence that had been instilled in him by those who had come before. And, as he glanced back at the ship, Kyle knew one thing for certain. He was ready. The operation was nearing its final phase. The fleet had successfully completed its mission, and Kyle found himself standing at the edge of the deck once more, staring out at the open sea. The ship had performed flawlessly, and his team had executed the task without a single hitch. But there was something else, something deeper, that kept running through his mind. It wasn't just the systems or the technicalities that had gone smoothly. It was the shift in him, the way he had grown over the past few weeks. He had gone from a nervous engineer, unsure of himself, to someone who now understood the true meaning of leadership. He knew now that it wasn't about being the smartest or the fastest. It was about being steady, about keeping your head when everyone else was panicking. He owed that realization to the quiet lessons from someone like Jack Ace Hamilton. The old veteran's calm demeanor, his unspoken wisdom, had guided Kyle more than any textbook or guide ever could. And now, as the ship sailed smoothly, Kyle knew he was ready for whatever came next. He wasn't the same person who had stepped onto this ship weeks ago. He had earned his place among the team, not just through technical skill, but through the understanding that leadership was about trust, about knowing when to step up and when to step back. It was about guiding others to succeed, not just pushing them for your own benefit. As the final day of the operation approached, Kyle was called to the Admiral's office once more. This time, there was no task to be handed down, no urgent problem to solve. Instead, the Admiral sat behind his desk, his usual stern expression replaced by a rare, approving smile. "Kyle," the Admiral said, his voice steady. "I've been watching you, and I've seen how you've handled everything that's been thrown at you. You've grown into the role of a leader, and the crew respects you. But more importantly, you've learned the true meaning of responsibility." Kyle stood still, taking in the words. It wasn't often that the Admiral showed this kind of approval, and the weight of it settled deeply within him. "Thank you, sir," Kyle replied, the gratitude in his voice undeniable. The Admiral stood up, walking over to a map of the fleet, his hand resting on it with authority. "You've earned this," the Admiral continued, his gaze shifting to Kyle. "And I'm putting you in charge of a new initiative. You'll be leading the next phase of operations, working directly with senior officers from the fleet. You'll be making decisions that affect not just your team, but the entire operation." Kyle's heart raced, but he wasn't afraid. He had learned so much, not just about the technicalities of the job, but about leadership, about making decisions under pressure. The Admiral's words felt like the culmination of everything he had worked for, everything he had learned. "You've got this," the Admiral added, his voice firm, but kind. "Lead them the way you've led yourself." As Kyle left the Admiral's office, the weight of the new responsibility settled in. But this time, he wasn't overwhelmed. He was ready to take the next step, to lead with the same quiet confidence that Jack had shown him. And for the first time in a long while, Kyle felt certain that he was exactly where he needed to be. The ship sailed on, and so did he, ready for whatever came next, with the lessons of the past guiding him every step of the way. The following weeks were a test of Kyle's leadership. He was now tasked with overseeing the next phase of operations, a responsibility that had him interacting with senior officers across the fleet. The stakes were higher, the challenges more complex, but Kyle no longer felt the uncertainty that once plagued him. With every meeting, every decision, he grew more comfortable in the role. The Admiral's faith in him had ignited a fire, one that fueled his confidence in a way he had never thought possible. As the fleet sailed through different zones, there were moments of unexpected turbulence. Some systems had minor failures, and the usual challenges came with any mission of this scale. But Kyle handled each one with the calm resolve he had learned from Jack Hamilton. He didn't just troubleshoot systems. He guided the team, listened to their input, and empowered them to find solutions. He wasn't the one solving every problem, but he was the one ensuring the right people had the tools, the support, and the autonomy to do so. The crew respected him, and even the senior officers began to seek his advice on occasion. There was no arrogance, no attempt to prove himself. Instead, there was a quiet confidence that came from knowing when to act and when to trust others to step up. During one late-night operation, a minor electrical failure on the main power grid threw the fleet off course for a few hours. Normally, this would have been a catastrophe, but Kyle remained unshaken. He called a meeting with his senior engineers, examined the problem, and set up a strategy to mitigate the issue. They worked long into the night, but by morning, the power grid was back online, and the fleet was on track. Kyle didn't revel in the success. Instead, he quietly acknowledged the hard work of his team. They had fixed the issue together. The morning after the operation, Admiral Cooper called Kyle into his office once more. As Kyle entered, he noticed the Admiral was standing by the window, looking out at the open sea. "Kyle," the Admiral began, his voice carrying the weight of the moment. "I've seen how you've grown in the past few weeks. You're not just leading, you're inspiring. Your team listens to you, respects you, and more importantly, they trust you." Kyle felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. This wasn't just about getting the job done anymore. It was about earning the trust of those around him. "Thank you, sir," Kyle said, his voice steady but filled with appreciation. The Admiral turned to face him, a rare smile on his face. "Keep this up," he said. "And don't forget the most important lesson. It's never just about the task. It's about the people who work with you." Kyle nodded, understanding the truth of those words more than ever before. As he left the Admiral's office, he couldn't help but reflect on how far he had come. He had started as an uncertain engineer, but now he stood as a leader, one who was ready for the future, whatever it might bring. And for the first time, he wasn't just ready for the next mission. He was ready to continue growing, to continue learning, and to be the kind of leader who made a difference not just in the systems he managed, but in the people he worked alongside. The ship sailed on, and Kyle, with all the lessons he had learned, was ready for whatever came next. As the weeks turned into months, Kyle's role as a leader continued to evolve. He found himself more and more in charge of decisions that affected the entire fleet. The systems continued to run smoothly, the team continued to perform well, and every challenge that arose was handled with the same calm efficiency that Kyle had learned to embody. But there was always a new test on the horizon. Each one came with its own set of problems, but Kyle no longer saw them as obstacles. Instead, he viewed each issue as an opportunity to grow, to refine his leadership. He had learned that the key to solving any problem wasn't just technical knowledge, but the ability to adapt and respond to the unique needs of the situation. One day, during a routine inspection of the fleet's weapons systems, a minor issue turned into a bigger problem. A malfunctioning sensor on one of the ships was affecting the targeting systems. It wasn't a critical failure, but it was enough to cause delays, and delays in operations like this could have a ripple effect on the rest of the fleet. Normally, this would have caused panic, especially with so many people relying on these systems to perform perfectly. But Kyle didn't panic. He took a deep breath, assessed the situation, and called a meeting with his engineers. He knew that the problem wasn't in the technology alone, it was in the execution. Together, they brainstormed solutions, checked every wire, every component, and in a few hours, the issue was resolved. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't quick. But it worked. As Kyle stood back, watching his team work together, he realized how far he had come. Just a few months ago, he would have hesitated to make such a decision on his own. But now, he trusted his team, and more importantly, he trusted himself. That afternoon, as the problem was officially resolved, Kyle received another call from Admiral Cooper. This time, there was no task to be handed down, no crisis to manage. Instead, the Admiral simply wanted to talk. "Kyle," the Admiral began, "I've been watching how you've handled things, and I'm proud of how far you've come. But I need you to understand something. Leadership isn't just about making the right decisions when everything goes well. It's about how you handle things when they don't." Kyle listened closely, knowing that the Admiral was about to impart one more lesson. "You've learned to lead during the good times," Admiral Cooper continued. "But it's in the difficult moments that true leadership shows. Remember that." The Admiral's words stuck with Kyle as the conversation ended. It wasn't just about solving problems, it was about the people you led and the example you set, even when things weren't going perfectly. The next few days brought more tests, more challenges. But Kyle didn't shy away from them. He took each one in stride, applying everything he had learned. With every decision, with every task, he became more confident in his ability to lead. He understood now that leadership wasn't a destination. It was a journey, one that required constant growth, constant learning. As he stood on the deck, watching the horizon, Cal couldn't help but smile. He wasn't the same man who had started this journey. He was stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever came next. The ship continued to sail on, but Kyle knew that no matter the course ahead, he was prepared. With the lessons of those who had guided him, he was ready to lead the fleet wherever it needed to go.